Commander Zexhai stood before the memory crystal, his six-fingered hands trembling as purple light danced across the surface. For 30 Earth years, he had kept this secret locked away in the deepest vaults of his mind. The nightmares still came, every sleep cycle. Visions of pink flesh torn apart by plasma fire. The screams that somehow cut through the vacuum of space. And those eyes, those terrible human eyes that held something his people had never encountered before. The war had started so simply. The Kethmori Empire stretched across 17 star systems. A civilization of order and logic that had conquered dozens of species through calculated strikes and superior technology. Humans were supposed to be just another primitive race to be absorbed into their growing domain. The initial scouting reports described them as bipedal mammals on a small blue planet, barely past their nuclear age. Military command estimated complete subjugation would take no more than 6 standard cycles. Zexhai had been a young squadron leader then, fresh from the academy with perfect scores in tactical warfare and xenobiology. His elongated skull housed a brain capable of processing battlefield data faster than most computers. Like all Kethmori, he had been genetically optimized for war-enhanced reflexes, redundant organs, and most importantly, the ability to remain coldly logical even in the most chaotic situations. Emotion was considered a weakness, a flaw that had been bred out of their species generations ago. The first human settlements they encountered reinforced their assumptions. Small farming communities scattered across the continents, defended by primitive projectile weapons that could barely scratch Kethmori battle armor. The humans ran in panic as antimatter torpedoes reduced their cities to glowing craters. It seemed almost too easy, but something felt wrong from the beginning. During the initial bombardment of what humans called New York City, Zexhai noticed something disturbing through his tactical display. Instead of simply fleeing like every other species they had encountered, many humans threw themselves into burning buildings to rescue others. Parents shielded their offspring with their own bodies, absorbing lethal radiation doses. Strangers formed human chains to pull survivors from rubble, working even as plasma fire rained down around them. Irrational behavior, his Lieutenant Vexnal had commented, adjusting the targeting systems for another strike. They prioritize individual preservation of non-genetic relatives over logical survival protocol. Zexhai had nodded in agreement. But something nagged at him. In all their previous conquests, fear had been their greatest weapon. When facing overwhelming force, intelligent species calculated their odds and surrendered. It was the logical choice. But these humans seemed incapable of making logical choices. The real shock came during the first ground assault on what humans called Chicago. Intelligence had indicated it was a major population center with minimal military presence. Zexhai led 3 battle pods containing 90 of the Empire's finest warriors. Each Kethmori soldier was equipped with plasma rifles that could melt through steel, powered armor that could withstand direct nuclear strikes, and neural implants that provided tactical data in real time. The landing went perfectly. Their pods touched down in the center of the city as planned. And within moments, they had established a perimeter. But instead of the panicked civilians they expected, they found themselves facing something unprecedented. Humans had barricaded themselves into buildings, but they weren't hiding. They were fighting back. At first, it was almost laughable. Their primitive firearms couldn't even dent Kethmori armor. But then, the explosions started. Humans had turned their own vehicles into bombs, ramming them into Kethmori positions without regard for their own survival. They used their knowledge of the city's infrastructure against the invaders, flooding subway tunnels while Kethmori troops were inside, bringing down entire buildings on their own heads just to take out a few enemy soldiers. What disturbed Zexhai most wasn't the tactics themselves, but the humans executing them. A female human, barely past breeding age, detonated herself and 3 Kethmori warriors with some kind of improvised explosive. Her last words, translated by his universal communicator, were, "Tell my mother, I love her." The concept was so alien that Zexhai's analytical mind struggled to process it. Love. It was a word that existed in their databases but had no real meaning to his people. The closest Keth Mori equivalent was optimal genetic compatibility, but that was a cold calculation, not this burning emotion that drove humans to impossible acts of sacrifice. As the battle raged through the city streets, Zexhai began to understand why his species' usual psychological warfare tactics weren't working. The Keth Mori had always relied on breaking their enemy's will to fight by demonstrating their technological superiority. But humans didn't seem to care about odds or logic. They fought with a desperation and fury that defied all military doctrine. A group of human younglings, none older than 15 Earth years, had somehow acquired military explosives and were using the city's sewer system to attack Keth Mori supply lines. When cornered, instead of surrendering, they activated their remaining explosives, taking themselves and 2 veteran warriors with them. Their final transmission was a message to remember us. By the end of the first day, Zexhai's force had taken massive casualties despite their technological advantage. 17 Keth Mori warriors were dead, and twice that number wounded. The humans had lost thousands, but they kept fighting. More importantly, news of the resistance was spreading. Other human settlements weren't surrendering as expected. They were preparing to fight. That night, as Zexhai reviewed the battlefield reports, he experienced something he had never felt before. His hands were shaking, and his normally steady thought patterns were chaotic. The medical officer diagnosed it as acute stress reaction, a condition that supposedly only affected inferior species. But Zexhai knew it was something else. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. The humans weren't just defending their territory. They were fighting for something his people couldn't understand, something that made them stronger than any genetic modification or technological enhancement. They called it hope, another concept that existed in their databases but had no real meaning to his logical mind. As he stared out at the burning cityscape, Zexhai began to realize that everything his people thought they knew about warfare was wrong. The humans weren't just another primitive species to be conquered. They were something entirely different, and that difference was going to change everything. The next morning brought news that would shatter the Keth Mori Empire's confidence forever. Human settlements across the globe had somehow coordinated a simultaneous response. They had used their primitive communication networks to share tactical information, turning each city into a fortress. Worse still, they were adapting to Keth Mori weapons with terrifying speed. In less than 24 hours, humans had figured out how to jury-rig their power systems to overload Keth Mori shields. They were using reflective surfaces to redirect plasma fire back at their attackers. Most unsettling of all, they were learning to predict Keth Mori tactics by studying their logical patterns. The Empire had always prided itself on superior intellect, but humans didn't think like them. They made intuitive leaps that defied logic, found solutions that shouldn't have worked, and most importantly, they did all of this while experiencing emotions that should have clouded their judgment. Zexhai received new orders that night. Escalate the conflict. High Command wanted to demonstrate the futility of resistance by targeting human population centers with planet-killer weapons. It was the standard protocol for stubborn species, and it had never failed before. But as he looked at the orders, Zexhai felt something he couldn't name. The humans had shown him something about himself that he didn't understand, something that made him question everything he had been taught. He thought about the young female who had died, calling out for her mother, about the children who chose death over surrender, about the way humans threw themselves into danger to save strangers. For the first time in his military career, Commander Zexhai hesitated before following orders. And in that moment of hesitation, he began to understand what it really meant to fight humans. They weren't just defending their planet. They were defending something much more dangerous to the Empire's way of life. They were defending their humanity. The planet-killer weapon hung in space above Earth like a mechanical moon, its dark metal surface bristling with antimatter arrays capable of cracking a world in half. Zexhai stood on the command bridge of the Imperial flagship, watching as final targeting calculations were uploaded to the weapon's core systems. In 6 hours, everything below would be reduced to cosmic dust. But those 6 hours would change everything. The delay had been necessary to evacuate Kethmori forces still on the surface. Standard protocol demanded that no Imperial assets be lost during planetary sterilization. What High Command hadn't expected was how the humans would use those 6 hours. Instead of panic, instead of chaos, the humans did something that sent ice through Zexhi's veins. They said goodbye. The communications arrays meant for military coordination were now carrying millions of final messages between humans across the globe. Mothers singing lullabies to children on other continents. Lovers sharing last words across impossible distances. Strangers offering comfort to anyone who would listen. The entire electromagnetic spectrum was flooded with human voices, reaching out to each other in their final moments. Zexhi found himself listening to these transmissions, against all protocol. His universal translator worked overtime, converting dozens of human languages into something he could understand. But the emotions behind the words needed no translation. A human male in what their maps called Tokyo was playing music on some kind of stringed instrument, broadcasting it freely for anyone who wanted to hear. Thousands were listening, adding their own voices to create something beautiful in the face of certain death. A female in London was reading stories to children who weren't even her own. Her voice steady and warm, despite the tears Zexhi could hear in every word. Most disturbing of all were the humans who spoke directly to the sky, as if they knew the Kethmori were listening. They didn't curse their killers or beg for mercy. Instead, they spoke of forgiveness, of understanding, of hope, that someday the galaxy might know peace. Some even expressed pity for their executioners, saying they understood that the Kethmori were just following orders. "Commander," his tactical officer Vexnal approached with a datapad, "we've detected massive energy buildups across the planet's surface. The humans appear to be attempting some kind of coordinated technological response." Zexhi studied the readings. Every major city was showing signs of massive electrical activity, far beyond normal human capabilities. But the patterns were wrong. Instead of weapons signatures, the energy was being channeled into their communications networks, their transportation systems, their power grids. "They're not building weapons," Zexhi realized, his analytical mind finally making sense of the data. "They're connecting." The truth was more terrifying than any military preparation could have been. Faced with extinction, the humans weren't trying to fight or flee. They were using their final hours to link every settlement, every city, every remote outpost into one vast network. 7 billion individuals were becoming something larger than the sum of their parts. Through this network flowed everything humans had ever learned, ever created, ever dreamed. Art, music, literature, scientific discoveries, personal memories, all of it being preserved and shared in a final act of defiance against oblivion. But more than information was moving through these connections. Hope was spreading like wildfire. Zexhi watched in fascination as human settlements that had been cut off from all outside contact suddenly began coordinating relief efforts. Food moved from areas of plenty to regions ravaged by the initial bombardment. Medical supplies flowed to wherever they were needed most. Experts in one field shared knowledge with strangers on the other side of the planet. But it was the messages that truly shook him. Humans were using their final hours, not for rage or despair, but to tell each other stories. Veterans were sharing tales of courage to inspire young fighters. Parents were recording everything they wanted their children to know. Artists were creating new works that captured the full spectrum of human experience, from birth to death, from love to loss. "Sir." Vexnal's voice carried a note of confusion that Zexhi had never heard from his logical subordinate. "We're receiving a transmission directed specifically at the Imperial fleet. It's coming from their primary communication hub in what they call Geneva." The main screen flickered to life, showing a human female with graying hair and eyes that held depths Zexhi couldn't fathom. Behind her stood representatives from every human nation, their faces calm, despite the death sentence hanging over their world. "To the commanders of the Kethmori Empire," she began, her voice carrying across space with crystal clarity. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I speak for humanity in what may be our final hour. We know you can understand our words, and we have a message for you. The bridge fell silent. Even the normally chattering technical displays seemed to quiet as the human continued. We have studied your species during these past days of conflict. We have learned about your empire, your technology, your way of life. We understand that you see us as primitives, as obstacles to be removed in your expansion across the galaxy. But we want you to know that we see you differently. She paused, looking directly into the camera, as if she could see through space to the alien beings watching her. We see a people who have lost something precious. You have built a perfect civilization, efficient and logical, free from the chaos of emotion. But in doing so, you have forgotten what makes life worth living. You conquer worlds, but you cannot create beauty. You preserve your lives, but you have forgotten how to truly live. Murmurs rippled across the bridge. Several officers were shifting uncomfortably, and Zexhai realized that this human was speaking truths that cut deeper than any weapon. In our final hours, we want to give you a gift, Dr. Vasquez continued. We want to show you what you're destroying, and what you might become if you choose a different path. The transmission shifted, and suddenly the screen filled with images of human life. Not the destruction and warfare of recent days, but the everyday miracles that the Keth Mori had overlooked. A human child, laughing as she chased soap bubbles in a garden. Elderly humans, sitting together in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined. Musicians from different cultures blending their sounds into something entirely new. More images flowed past scientists, sharing discoveries that had taken centuries to develop. Teachers nurturing young minds, artists capturing the beauty of their world in countless different ways. But most powerful of all were the simple moments of connection between individuals. Humans comforting strangers, sharing meals with those who had nothing, risking their own safety to help others. This is what you're ending today, Dr. Vasquez said, as the images faded back to her steady gaze. Not just 7 billion lives, but 7 billion unique perspectives on what it means to exist in this universe. Each of us sees reality differently, and those differences make us stronger, not weaker. 1. The transmission continued for nearly an hour, showing the Imperial fleet everything humanity had accomplished in their brief existence. Poetry that captured the essence of love and loss in words. Music that could make listeners feel emotions they couldn't name. Art that found beauty in the most unlikely places. But what shook Zexhai to his core weren't the grand achievements. It was the small acts of everyday heroism that humans took for granted. The way they instinctively helped those in need. The way they formed connections with strangers. The way they kept hope alive even in impossible circumstances. We forgive you, Dr. Vasquez said, as the transmission neared its end. We understand that you believe you're doing what's necessary for your people's survival, but we want you to know that there is another way, a universe where different species can learn from each other instead of destroying each other. She stood, and behind her, every human representative did the same. Our planet may die today, but our message will survive. It's encoded in this transmission, designed to be preserved in your ship's memory banks long after we're gone. Someday, when you're ready, you'll understand what we tried to tell you. That consciousness is precious, that diversity is strength, and that love is the most powerful force in the universe. The transmission ended, but its impact was far from over. Across the Imperial fleet, something unprecedented was happening. Keth Mori officers were experiencing what their medical scanners classified as system malfunctions. But Zexhai recognized the symptoms. They were feeling emotions. His own tactical officer was staring at his display with moisture gathering in his eyes, another malfunction that had been spreading through the crew. The communications specialist was trembling as he replayed certain segments of the human transmission. Even the ship's commander, a veteran of dozens of conquered worlds, was standing motionless, with the expression Zexhai had never seen on a Kethmori face. The planet-killer weapons charging cycle was almost complete. In 30 minutes, Earth would become a lifeless rock spinning in space. But in those 30 minutes, everything the Kethmori thought they knew about themselves had been shattered. Zexhai looked around the bridge at his fellow officers, seeing confusion and fear, and something else. Something that had no name in their language but that the humans called wonder. For the first time in their species' history, the Kethmori were questioning whether their perfect logic was actually perfect at all. The countdown continued. But Zexhai wasn't watching the numbers anymore. He was thinking about a human child chasing bubbles, about strangers helping each other, about 7 billion unique perspectives on existence that were about to be snuffed out forever. And for the first time in his life, Commander Zexhai wondered if there might be something more valuable than victory. The countdown reached 0. And nothing happened. Commander Zexhai stood frozen at his command station, his finger hovering over the firing sequence that would end human civilization forever. Around him, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence as their commander, their perfectly logical, emotionless commander, struggled with something that had no name in their language. For the first time in Kethmori military history, a direct order from high command was not being followed. "Sir?" Vexnal's voice cracked with confusion. "The weapon is fully charged and ready to fire. High Command is requesting confirmation of planetary sterilization." Zexhai looked at his tactical officer, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in those alien eyes. The human transmission had done something to them all, had awakened parts of their consciousness that their perfect society had tried to eliminate. The bridge crew was experiencing emotions, and they had no framework for understanding what was happening to them. "I need more time," Zexhai said finally, his voice hoarse with strain. "Tell High Command we've detected anomalous readings that require investigation before we proceed." It was a lie, and everyone on the bridge knew it. But it bought them precious minutes to grapple with the impossible choice before them. The communications array crackled to life again, but this time it wasn't from Earth. High Command's cold voice filled the bridge, carrying the authority of the entire Kethmori Empire. "Commander Zexhai, you are experiencing what your medical officer has classified as emotional contamination from prolonged exposure to human psychology. Report to the medical bay immediately for neural recalibration. Lieutenant Vexnal will assume command and execute the planetary sterilization protocol." Zexhai felt something twist in his chest, fear. Not for himself, but for the billions of lives hanging in the balance. The thought of letting someone else destroy Earth filled him with an anguish he couldn't name. "High Command," he said, surprising himself with his steady voice. "I request permission to address the Imperial Council directly. The tactical situation has developed complications that require command-level review." A long pause followed. When High Command responded, their tone carried a warning. "Commander, you have 5 minutes to present your case via quantum link. Be aware that any deviation from Imperial doctrine will be considered treason." The quantum communicator hummed to life, projecting the holographic forms of the 12 most powerful beings in the Kethmori Empire. Each council member had lived for centuries, their consciousness enhanced and refined until they were more like living computers than biological entities. They represented the pinnacle of Kethmori evolution, pure logic, uncontaminated by emotion. "Speak," commanded High Admiral Kexthol, his ancient features carved from gray stone. "Explain why a planet of primitives still exists." Zexhai had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, he found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. "Council, the humans have shown us something we never expected to find. They possess a quality that makes them more dangerous to our empire than any weapon or technology. They have the ability to change other species just by being themselves." Murmurs rippled through the council, but High Admiral Kexthal remained unmoved. "The humans fight not just for survival, but for concepts we have dismissed as weakness: love, hope, compassion. These emotions don't make them weaker, they make them stronger. They allow humans to accomplish impossible things, to find solutions we never considered, to survive against overwhelming odds." Zexhai paused, knowing his next words might condemn him. Council. I believe our entire understanding of strength is flawed. We have spent generations eliminating emotion from our society, believing it would make us superior. But we have only made ourselves incomplete. The silence that followed was deafening. When High Admiral Kexthul finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Commander Zexhai, you have been infected by human irrationality. Your judgment is compromised. The Empire has conquered 17 star systems using our current methods. We will not change our fundamental nature because of one primitive species. But what if we're wrong? Zexhai pressed on, knowing he was crossing the point of no return. What if emotion isn't a weakness, but a strength we've never learned to use? The humans have shown us capabilities we thought impossible. They've made scientific discoveries in hours that should have taken years. They've coordinated global responses without central authority. They've inspired their people to fight beyond any logical limits. Another council member, Admiral Vex Morin, leaned forward. Even if what you say is true, Commander, it changes nothing. The humans represent a threat to imperial stability. If our people are exposed to their influence, our entire civilization could collapse into chaos. Or, Zexhai said quietly, our civilization could finally become complete. The words hung in the air like a weapon. What Zexhai was suggesting wasn't just military strategy, it was revolution. He was proposing that the Keth Mori Empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy, had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what made a civilization strong. High Admiral Kexthul's expression darkened. Commander, you will execute the planetary sterilization protocol immediately, or you will be relieved of command and court-martialed for treason. This is your final opportunity to maintain your honor. Zexhai looked around the bridge at his crew. In their faces, he saw the same struggle he was experiencing. They were changing, becoming something their society had never imagined possible. The humans had given them a gift more precious than technology or conquest. They had given them the ability to feel. Council, Zexhai said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I have served the Empire faithfully for my entire life. I have conquered worlds in your name and followed every order without question. But today, I ask you to trust my judgment one final time. He turned to look at Earth through the viewport, that blue marble suspended in the darkness of space. Don't destroy the humans. Study them. Learn from them. They have something we've lost. Something that could make us not just conquerors, but creators. They could teach us to be more than we ever imagined possible. The Council's response was swift and final. Commander Zexhai, you are hereby relieved of command for treason and contamination by hostile alien influence. Lieutenant Vex, Nal. Assume command immediately and execute planetary sterilization. But when the quantum link flickered off, something extraordinary happened. Vexnal stepped forward, but instead of taking command, he moved to stand beside Zexhai. Sir, he said quietly, I also request permission to present evidence to High Command. One by one, the bridge crew stepped forward. The communications officer, the weapons specialist, the navigator, all of them choosing to stand with their commander against the most powerful authority in their known universe. It was a mutiny. But it was also something more. It was the first time in Keth Mori history that soldiers had chosen conscience over orders, compassion over conquest. Sir, the communications officer said, we're receiving new transmissions from Earth. The humans know what's happening up here. They're trying to communicate with us directly. The main screen came to life, showing Dr. Vasquez once again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood representatives of every major human organization, scientists, artists, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens who had somehow found their way to this final gathering. Commander Zexhai, she said, and the use of his name sent a shock through the bridge crew. The humans had been listening to their communications, learning their language, understanding their struggle. We know the choice you're facing. We know what it means to stand against everything you've been taught to believe. She stepped closer to the camera. We want you to know that whatever happens next, you have already changed everything. Your questions, your doubts, your willingness to see us as more than primitives. These are the seeds of something beautiful. The transmission shifted to show scenes from across Earth. Despite their uncertain fate, humans were continuing to live, to create, to love. Children played in bomb craters, turning destruction into games. Artists painted murals on the walls of ruined buildings, finding beauty in devastation. Families shared meals made from emergency rations, grateful for whatever time they had left. This is who we are, Dr. Vasquez continued. Not perfect, not logical, but alive in ways that matter. And if you choose to spare us, we promise to help you discover what it means to be truly alive as well. The transmission ended just as the first Imperial reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace. 3 more planet-killer weapons and a dozen battle cruisers. Enough firepower to sterilize every planet in the solar system. High Command had decided that the contamination needed to be stopped before it could spread. Zexhai looked at his crew, these brave souls who had chosen to stand with him against impossible odds. He thought about the humans below, facing extinction with courage and grace. He thought about the choice that would define not just his own fate, but the future of 2 civilizations. In the end, the decision was simple. Commander Zexhai turned to his weapons officer. Disable the planet-killer weapon. All of them, sir. The officer's voice trembled with the magnitude of what they were about to do. That's an act of war against our own fleet. No, Zexhai said, feeling something new and powerful flowing through his consciousness. That's an act of hope. The next few minutes would be remembered as the turning point in galactic history, as the Imperial fleet's own weapons turned against the planet killers, disabling them in spectacular explosions of light. A message spread across every communication channel in the Empire. It was Zexhai's voice, but it carried the wisdom of 7 billion human souls. To all ships, all worlds, all citizens of the Empire, today we have discovered something more valuable than conquest. We have discovered what it means to choose compassion over control, growth over dominance, love over fear. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. Other ships began joining the mutiny as the human message spread through Imperial communication networks. The gift of emotion, once unleashed, could not be contained. When the fighting ended, Earth still hung peacefully in space, its blue oceans reflecting the light of its star. The Kethmori Empire had faced its first defeat, but in losing, they had gained something infinitely more precious. They had learned how to feel. Years later, as the first joint human Kethmori colonies began to flourish among the stars, Zexhai would stand before that same memory crystal, no longer trembling but strong with the weight of his choices. The nightmares had been replaced by dreams of possibility, of 2 species learning from each other, of a universe where diversity was celebrated rather than destroyed. The war against humanity had lasted only days, but it had changed everything. It had taught an empire of conquerors what it truly meant to be alive. And in the end, perhaps that was the most human gift of all. The ability to transform destruction into creation, fear into hope, and enemies into friends.